My name is Adeline, and at 33 years old, I had finally achieved the one thing my family always preached but never practiced: stability. As a forensic accountant, my life was a tidy ledger of balanced accounts and predictable outcomes, a stark contrast to the chaotic, high-stakes world of my parents and older brother, who were celebrated art dealers. The day I closed on my first home, a modest but meticulously restored craftsman bungalow, I thought they would finally see me, not as the boring, risk-averse daughter, but as a success in my own right. Instead, they saw my home as a blank canvas for their own masterpiece of manipulation. They arrived not with housewarming gifts, but with a shocking proposal, disguised as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They wanted to use my new home as collateral for a multi-million-dollar art acquisition, a deal that would either elevate them to legendary status or leave us all in ruins. When I refused, they didn't just get angry. They unleashed a secret weapon from my past, a betrayal I thought was long buried, designed to prove that my carefully built life was never truly mine to begin with. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from. Before I reveal the secret that almost cost me everything, hit like and subscribe for more real-life stories about family betrayals and the high price of independence. My world was built on the quiet certainty of numbers. In the volatile universe of my family, I was the anchor of pragmatism. My father, Julian, and my mother, Genevieve, ran a prestigious art gallery, a business they inherited and expanded into an empire of taste and influence. My older brother, Sebastian, at 37, was their charismatic heir, a natural salesman who could weave a narrative around a canvas that made collectors reach for their checkbooks. They lived in a world of gallery openings, European auctions, and hushed high-stakes negotiations. Their conversations were peppered with names like Rothko and de Kooning, and their home was a museum of minimalist white walls and carefully curated masterpieces. My life was a quiet rebellion against all of it. I found beauty not in abstract expressionism, but in the elegant logic of a balanced spreadsheet. My career at a top accounting firm in Chicago was my own achievement, built on merit, not on the family name. My bungalow, purchased with a down payment I had saved for 10 years, was my declaration of independence. It had a small garden for my heirloom tomatoes and a sturdy oak desk for my freelance forensic work. It was a life of tangible assets and measurable success. The family mythology cast me as the sensible one, a backhanded compliment that really meant uninspired. When Sebastian convinced my parents to invest in a risky, unproven artist who later became a sensation, he was hailed as a visionary. When I advised them against a partnership that later dissolved in a messy lawsuit, my caution was seen as a lack of faith. They celebrated bold risks. I calculated them. This fundamental difference was the chasm between us. The day of the closing, I called them, my voice buzzing with a rare, uninhibited joy. "I got the house! The papers are signed! It's officially mine!" "That's wonderful, darling," my mother said, her voice slightly distracted. I could hear the murmur of gallery patrons in the background. "We must have a proper celebration. Let us host a dinner for you this Sunday, a real family affair." I should have been suspicious of her sudden enthusiasm. Family affairs were usually reserved for Sebastian's achievements or a major gallery acquisition. But I was so eager for their approval, so hopeful that this tangible symbol of my success would finally bridge the gap, that I ignored the warning signs. I arrived at their sprawling, art-filled apartment on Sunday to find not just my parents and brother, but also Mr. Sterling, their longtime financial advisor, and a woman I'd never seen before, with an intense, assessing gaze. "Adeline, so glad you could make it," my father greeted me, a glass of champagne already in his hand. "We have the most extraordinary news. This is Ms. Dubois, a representative from the Moreau estate." The name Moreau sent a jolt through me. Jacques Moreau, a reclusive, almost mythical French artist who had passed away a decade ago, leaving behind a hidden collection of masterpieces rumored to be his greatest work. The estate has agreed, in principle, to sell us the entire collection, Sebastian said, his eyes gleaming with ambition. The Moreau collection. It would be the biggest deal of our careers. It would make us legends. My mother clasped her hands and her face was flushed with excitement. There's just one small complication, Julian said, turning his full attention to me. The estate requires proof of significant liquid assets to secure the deal, more than we currently have accessible. The banks are being difficult. He paused, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. We need to leverage another asset to secure the line of credit, and that, my dear Adeline, is where you and your charming new home come in. The champagne flute felt slick in my suddenly sweaty palm. I stared at my father, certain I had misheard him. My house? It's the perfect solution, Sebastian chimed in, stepping forward as if explaining a simple concept to a child. You just purchased it, so it has a clear, recent valuation. It's unencumbered by any other liens besides the mortgage. We would use it as temporary collateral to secure the loan. Once the Moreau pieces are sold, and they will sell for a fortune, we pay back the loan, and the house is yours again, free and clear. We'll even give you a 10% finder's fee for your trouble. A finder's fee, as if I were a business associate, not their daughter whose entire life savings were tied up in that property. No. The word was out of my mouth before I had time to soften it. It was a reflex, a gut-level rejection of their casual, audacious request. Julian's smile tightened. Adeline, perhaps you don't understand the scale of this opportunity. This is Moreau. The sale of a single piece would cover the entire loan. The risk is infinitesimal. The risk is my home, I said, my voice shaking slightly. The home I just bought. The one I've worked for my entire adult life. Don't be so dramatic, Genevieve said with a dismissive wave of her hand. It's just a formality. Paperwork. You have always been so literal about things. You get that from my side of the family. She directed a small, apologetic smile at Miss Dubois, who was watching the exchange with the cool detachment of a biologist observing insects. Mr. Sterling, the advisor, finally spoke, his tone grave. The risk is not, as your father says, infinitesimal. The art market is volatile. If there were a sudden downturn, or if the authenticity of any piece were challenged, the estate could call the loan. You would lose the house. Thank you for your input, Sterling, my father said, shooting him a look that could curdle milk. Adeline knows that family is the most important investment. She's always been there for us. The lie was so blatant, so utterly disconnected from our reality that I almost gasped. I had never been there for them in this way, because they never needed me. They had their golden boy, Sebastian, for all the important things. I was just the sensible daughter, good for balancing a checkbook or organizing a holiday spreadsheet. I'm sorry, I said, standing up and placing my untouched champagne on a nearby table. I can't do it. My answer is no. I turned to leave, but Sebastian stepped in my way, his charming smile gone, replaced with a hard, angry glint in his eyes. You would really deny this family its greatest moment because of your own selfish fears? After everything Dad has done for you? Everything you've done for me? I repeated, the injustice of it all finally boiling over. You mean the college tuition I paid for myself with scholarships and 2 part-time jobs while you funded Sebastian's gap year in Paris? Or maybe you mean the down payment on this house, which I saved by living in a tiny studio for 10 years, while you bought him a new convertible for his 30th birthday? We gave you a good life, an education, my father boomed, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. We taught you the value of money. No, I corrected him, my voice now clear and strong. You taught me the value of your money.
You never taught me that I had any value beyond what I could provide." I pushed past Sebastian and walked out, the sound of my mother calling my name trailing behind me. I drove home in a blind fury, the carefully constructed walls of my composure crumbling. I had spent my life trying to earn their respect on my own terms, and the moment I finally had something they wanted, they saw it not as my achievement, but as their resource. The worst part was a nagging voice in my head, a voice conditioned by a lifetime of being the good daughter that whispered I was being selfish. Was I? Was I really choosing a house over my family's legacy? The question haunted me, and I knew with a sinking heart that this was only the beginning.
The pressure campaign started subtly. First came the phone calls from my mother, her voice dripping with wounded disappointment. "I just don't understand how you can be so unfeeling, Adeline. Your father is devastated. He sees this as a personal rejection." Then came the emails from Sebastian, filled with links to articles about the Moreau collection, financial projections, and testimonials from art critics. "Just look at the numbers, Addie. It's a sure thing. You're letting fear cloud your judgment." They framed my refusal not as a rational financial decision, but as an emotional failing. I was fearful, I was unfeeling, I was selfish. It was a classic strategy of emotional manipulation, one they had perfected over years. When I held my ground, they escalated. They began to weaponize their social influence. My Aunt Beatrice called, her voice a carefully calibrated mixture of concern and judgment. "Your mother is worried sick. She thinks you're isolating yourself. This accounting job, it's made you hard, Adeline. What happened to the sweet girl who used to paint with her mother in the gallery?" The sweet girl who had been told her paintings weren't commercially viable and was encouraged to pursue a more practical career. They even managed to turn my own success against me. That's the irony of it, I overheard my father telling a family friend at a charity event I had reluctantly attended. "We taught her to be so financially responsible that now she can't see the bigger picture. She's become a prisoner of her own prudence." My prudence, my decade of sacrifice and disciplined saving, now reframed as a character flaw? The final, most painful blow came when they turned to my past. I was 21, a senior in college, and had fallen into a deep depression after a difficult breakup. I had been struggling with my course load, my 2 jobs, and the constant unspoken pressure to be the easy child. I had started having panic attacks and had, for a period of about 6 months, taken prescribed anti-anxiety medication. It was a vulnerable, painful time in my life, one that I had shared with my mother in a moment of desperate honesty. I had since been to therapy, learned coping mechanisms, and hadn't had a panic attack in nearly a decade. It was a chapter of my life I thought was long closed. One evening, my father requested a meeting, just the 2 of us, at a quiet downtown bar. His tone was serious, and a foolish part of me hoped he was ready to apologize. "Adeline," he began, swirling the whiskey in his glass, "your mother and I are worried. This refusal to help, this rigidity, it reminds me of when you were in college, when you were unwell." My blood ran cold. "I was depressed, Dad. I got help. I'm fine now." "Are you?" he asked, his gaze intense. "Because a healthy person doesn't choose a house over her family. A healthy person doesn't reject a life-changing opportunity out of fear. We think you might be having a relapse. We think you might not be capable of making sound financial decisions for yourself right now." The threat, so monstrous and yet so calmly delivered, hung in the air between us. He wasn't just questioning my decision, he was questioning my sanity. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you persist in this refusal, we may have to take steps to protect you from yourself. We still have all your old medical records. It wouldn't be difficult to petition the court for a temporary conservatorship just to manage your assets until you're feeling more stable." He took a sip of his whiskey. "Of course, it would be a terrible shame to have all that private medical history made public, but if it's what we have to do to save the family deal and to save you from your own poor judgment, then we will. The choice is yours.
help us, or we will be forced to help you." I stared at him, at the man who was my father, who was threatening to use my most vulnerable moment against me, to paint me as mentally unstable in a court of law, all to get his hands on my house. The love I had so desperately craved from him curdled into something cold and hard in my chest. This wasn't about family. This was about winning. And he had just shown me he was willing to destroy his own daughter to do it.
I walked out of the bar and into the cold Chicago night, my father's threat echoing in my ears. A temporary conservatorship. The idea was as absurd as it was terrifying. He would use my past depression, a private struggle I had overcome years ago, to declare me legally incompetent. He would control my finances, my home, my life. All for an art deal? I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to the one place that had always felt like a true sanctuary, the rare book room at the university library. Surrounded by the scent of old paper and leather, I sat for hours, not reading, just thinking. My father was counting on me to be scared, to be ashamed. He was counting on my desire to keep my past private, to override my refusal to cooperate. He had underestimated me. He had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness. The next morning, I didn't call a therapist. I called a lawyer. I found Sarah Polson, a name I'd gotten from a colleague. She was known as a shark, a litigator who specialized in fighting predatory conservatorships. Her office was sleek and modern, a world away from the musty library. She listened to my story without interruption, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair, a grim smile playing on her lips. "Your father is playing a very dangerous game," she said, "and a very stupid one. A 6-month bout of depression 10 years ago is not grounds for a conservatorship. Any judge would laugh it out of court. But the threat itself, that is a form of coercion, and we can use that." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. What do? We don't wait for him to file. We strike first. Sarah's plan was bold and terrifying. We would file for a restraining order against my father, citing his threats and emotional blackmail. We would attach a sworn affidavit from my former therapist, who I had already called, confirming that my past mental health issues were resolved and had no bearing on my current decision-making capacity. And we would preemptively send a letter to every major art publication and auction house in the country, detailing the family's strong-arm tactics. "Your family's power lies in their reputation," Sarah explained. "Their entire business is built on an image of sophistication and integrity. We are going to show the world who they really are behind the gallery walls." The thought of such a public confrontation made me physically ill. But what was the alternative? To live under the constant threat of my father's control? To give in and lose everything I had worked for? While Sarah prepared the legal filings, I did my own digging. I was a forensic accountant, after all. Research was my superpower. I spent a weekend combing through public records, old business filings, and forgotten legal databases related to my family's gallery. What I found was a pattern. My father, Julian, had a history of using aggressive, borderline unethical tactics to acquire art. There were 2 previous lawsuits from smaller artists who claimed he had pressured them into unfair consignment deals. Both had been settled out of court, the records sealed. But the most damning discovery was about Sebastian. My brilliant, visionary brother had a gambling problem. A serious one. I found records of high-interest loans from shady lenders and the lien against his expensive downtown condo. He was in deep financial trouble. The Moreau deal wasn't just about legacy. It was about bailing out Sebastian. My family wasn't just risking my house. They were risking it to pay for my brother's addiction. The knowledge settled in my gut like a cold stone. This whole charade, the pressure, the threats, it was all to protect Sebastian,
the golden child, from the consequences of his own reckless behavior, just as it had always been. My role in this family was not just to be the afterthought, it was to be the emergency fund, the safety net for my brother's failures.
The day before our scheduled court hearing for the restraining order, I asked for one last family meeting. I told them I had a counteroffer. They agreed immediately, assuming I had finally broken. We met at their gallery, after hours. The space was silent and cavernous, the valuable paintings on the walls like silent, judging witnesses. They sat across from me at a large glass table, a united front of expectation. "We're so glad you've come to your senses, Adeline," my mother began, her voice radiating relief. "I'm not here to accept your offer," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I'm here to make my own." I slid a folder across the table. This is a summary of Sebastian's debts. Over $200,000 to some very unsavory people. I believe they are getting impatient. Sebastian's face went white. My parents stared at the papers in stunned silence. "And this," I said, sliding another folder over, "is a copy of the restraining order we are filing tomorrow morning, along with a press release detailing your attempt to blackmail me using my confidential medical history. I've sent it to the Art Chronicle and the Global Auction Review. I believe they are very interested in the story." I let the reality of the situation sink in. The silence was broken only by my mother's sharp intake of breath. "What do you want?" my father finally asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I want you to call off the Moreau deal," I said. "It's too risky, and you are doing it for the wrong reasons. I want you to get Sebastian into a real treatment program for his gambling addiction, and I want a formal, written apology from all three of you for the emotional distress and coercion you have put me through. In exchange for that, I will not file the restraining order, the press release will be retracted, and Sebastian's financial troubles will remain a private family matter. And one more thing, you will never, ever ask me for money or assets again. This is the only deal on the table. You have until tomorrow morning to decide." I stood up, my legs surprisingly steady. "You built your empire on an image of integrity. I suggest you think long and hard about what that image is worth to you." I walked out of the gallery and into the night, not knowing if I had just saved my family or destroyed it completely. The call came at dawn. It was my father. His voice was stripped of its usual booming authority, leaving behind something I hadn't heard in years: defeat. "We agree to your terms," he said, the words sounding like they were being dragged from him. "The Moreau deal is off. Sebastian is... We are looking into treatment programs." There was no apology. Not yet, but it was a start. The restraining order was put on hold, the press release buried. A fragile, tense ceasefire settled over our family. Sebastian, stripped of the Moreau deal as his get-out-of-jail-free card, was forced to confront the reality of his situation. He sold his condo, used the proceeds to pay off his most dangerous debts, and moved into a small, rented apartment. He started attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings, reluctantly at first, then with a dawning sense of acceptance. The charismatic, confident shell he had presented to the world had cracked, revealing the scared, insecure man underneath. My relationship with my parents entered a new, uncharted territory. We didn't talk for months. The written apology arrived via courier, a stilted, lawyer-vetted document that fulfilled the letter of our agreement, but lacked any real heart. I filed it away, accepting it for what it was: a business transaction, not a reconciliation. I poured my energy into my own life. I sold my bungalow, a decision that felt less like a loss and more like shedding a skin. I bought a sleek, modern condo in a downtown high-rise, a space that was entirely mine, with no history, no ghosts. I excelled at work, earning a promotion to senior partner at my firm. My forensic skills, it turned out, were highly valued in a world of complex financial maneuvering. I was good at finding the truth hidden in the numbers. It was a year later, at a quiet industry dinner, that I saw him again. My father. He was there with a client, and he looked smaller. The tailored suit seemed to hang off his frame. He saw me across the room, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the old intimidation in his eyes, quickly followed by something else, respect. He walked over, his steps hesitant. "Adeline, you look well." "I am well, Dad." "I heard about your promotion. Congratulations. It's impressive." The compliment, so simple and yet so long withheld, felt strange. "I wanted to tell you, Sebastian is doing well. He's in a good program. He's working as a consultant for a small gallery, starting over." He paused, searching for the right words. "You were right. About the deal, about him, about everything. I was so focused on the legacy I almost destroyed the family." It wasn't the effusive apology my inner child had always craved, but coming from him, it was monumental. It was an admission. It was the truth. "Thank you for saying that," I said, a genuine warmth spreading through my chest. We didn't magically become a happy family overnight. The wounds were too deep, the patterns too ingrained. But we began to build something new, something more honest. We started having dinner, just my father and I, once a month. We talked about the art world, about financial markets, about books. We never talked about the past, but its presence was always there, a silent reminder of the boundaries that now defined our relationship. My relationship with Sebastian began to heal too, in its own way. He called me 6 months into his recovery. "I need to apologize, Addie," he said, his voice quiet and sober. "Not just for the house, but for my whole life. I took and you gave. That was our dynamic. It wasn't fair. I'm trying to learn how to be a different person now." I started attending an occasional family support meeting with him, not as his savior, but as his sister. I was not there to fix his problems, but to witness his effort to fix them himself. My mother was the last to come around. Her identity was so tied to the image of the perfect family, the brilliant children, that the reality of our dysfunction was the hardest for her to accept. But seeing her son in recovery and her husband slowly, carefully, rebuilding a relationship with me, she began to soften. She started volunteering at a local art program for at-risk youth, pouring her energy into nurturing talent without the pressure of commercial success. Last month, on the 2-year anniversary of the night I walked out of the gallery, I hosted a small dinner in my condo, my parents, Sebastian, and I. It was awkward at times, the silences filled with unspoken history, but there was also laughter, a real, unforced sound. As I looked at them, at these flawed, complicated people who were my family, I realized the truth. I had spent my entire life trying to earn my place at their table, believing that their approval was the ultimate prize. But the real victory wasn't being invited to their table. It was building a table of my own, and then on my own terms, choosing to let them have a seat. Have you ever had to fundamentally reset the terms of a family relationship? What did it take to make them see you as an equal? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories about the difficult, messy, and ultimately rewarding work of building honest relationships. Remember, your value is not determined by the role your family assigns you. It's determined by the respect you demand for yourself. Thank you for listening, and may you always have the courage to build your own table.